Welcome to Peace, Love, Liberty Radio, online at fppradio.com. You know, it's almost the end of the year. I know there's about a week left, but I figured it's close enough to the end of the year that, you know, and it's also, you know, right in between Christmas and New Year's. It's actually, you know, the day after Christmas. Happy Boxing Day to any of my Canadian listeners. But, you know, I figured let's do something a little light, or, you know, actually lighter than normal. And I went to Google and I pulled up, they have their top search trends for the entire year. And they have it broke down by overall searches. And then they have various categories. So the most searched person, aside from Robin Williams, because he was the #1 overall top search. But under the list of people, they have Jennifer Lawrence, Kim Kardashian, Tracy Morgan as the top 3. Then they have like the top searched GIFs, the top searched actors, actresses, athletes. But some of the categories are very interesting. For instance, they have how to airdrop, how to contour, how to vote, how to kiss, and how to craft are the top 5 searches for the year on how to. But going through some of these, it reminded me of news stories throughout the year that I had forgotten about. One of the stories that I hadn't totally forgotten about it, because as soon as I saw it, I was like, oh yeah, I remember that story, but I forgot that it happened this year. And it's under the list of most searched selfies. And let me just read the top 5. There's Oscar selfie, and I'm sure that if you're somebody that watches the Oscars, you remember that. Apparently, a bunch of actors and actresses all got together with somebody famous. I don't remember who it was. And they all took like one big group selfie. The second most popular selfie search is monkey selfie. Then Obama selfie, squirrel selfie, and David Ortiz selfie. There's one of these that I remember very vividly making a lot of news because the man who owned the camera claimed ownership of the picture. And that is the monkey selfie picture. The squirrel selfie, no, a squirrel did not take a picture. Some guy tried to take a picture of himself with a squirrel, and people were Googling squirrel selfie to try and find that photo. Not in the top 5, but in the top 10 was elephant selfie, and this is one that I had not heard of, where an elephant actually did take a picture of itself. There was a guy at some wildlife reserve, and he dropped his phone, and it just happened to land face up, and the elephant walked over and like hit his trunk on the camera, and it wound up taking a picture. And I think one of the reasons that this didn't get more publicity, or at least come to my attention, is because the guy never claimed ownership of the photo, and he also wasn't some kind of, you know, really rich photographer guy that was taking photos for a living. So I've got a story about the monkey selfie. And this is one of the stories that is what brought this monkey selfie thing to my attention. So this particular story is from NBC News, and I don't see a date on it, but, August. It was in mid-August. The article here from NBC News says, before you go bananas over a monkey selfie, know that the U.S. Copyright Office is on the side of humans. The federal body responsible for registering copyright claims has confirmed that a monkey or any other animal that takes a selfie doesn't own the copyright to the photo. In an update to copyright regulations and practices published this week, and of course this was back in August, the Copyright Office spells out examples of works that are not eligible for copyright protection. They include a photograph taken by a monkey and a mural painted by an elephant. The office has long stipulated that only works created by a human being can be registered for copyright, but the animal examples it cites in the updated guidelines is new, according to the National Journal. Now, what I find to be very interesting here is what comes in the next paragraph. It's really why the Copyright Office even put out this thing back in August. So the article continues. It says the monkey example relates to a legal tussle between British wildlife photographer David J. Slater and Wikimedia, the nonprofit foundation behind Wikipedia, over a selfie taken by a monkey in Indonesia in 2011. So this photograph is 3 years old. There's been a legal battle between the guy that owned the camera and the Wikimedia Foundation. The female macaw monkey snatched Slater's camera and snapped a few cute pictures of herself, one of which became quite famous and made Slater some money. Slater requested that Wikimedia remove the photo from Wikimedia Commons, a repository of images that are free for the public to use. So the Wikimedia Commons, if you're not aware, they put up things that are in the public domain or things that have been otherwise licensed for reuse. And among those, I believe, millions of photos in the Wikimedia Commons, one of the pictures was this monkey selfie. Wikimedia, after being asked by Slater to remove the photo, refused, saying that the copyright should belong to the person taking the photo, and in this case, the person that owned the camera did not take the photo. And, of course, the U.S. Copyright Office agreed with the Wikimedia Foundation that a monkey cannot own a copyright because a monkey is not a person. The human that owned the camera cannot claim copyright. Well, they can claim it, but it won't stand up in court. They don't have the copyright to the photo that was taken by something other than themselves. And one thing that's interesting that seems to be overlooked a good bit is that anything created by a deity. So, for instance, if someone says that, an alien being created something, or a god or an angel created a work, that work cannot be copyrighted. There's more when we come back on Peace, Love, Liberty Radio. Coinbase is a simple and secure online Bitcoin wallet for sending, receiving, and storing Bitcoin. Coinbase also allows you to buy and sell Bitcoin using a bank account or use their tools to accept Bitcoin as a merchant. Opening a wallet is quick and easy, and for merchants, there are no transaction fees on the first $1 million worth of transactions. I trust Coinbase. You should too. Get started at coinbase.fppradio.com. Hi, I'm Darryl W. Perry, and I need your help to take Peace, Love, Liberty Radio on the road. In the spirit of Motorhome Diaries and Liberty on Tour, I intend to take the message of peace, love, and liberty on the road. I intend to leave New Hampshire at the conclusion of the New Hampshire Liberty Forum and return at the beginning of PorcFest. During the 104-day trip, I'll be visiting at least 10 cities across the country, speaking to people about the ideas of peace, love, and liberty, while continuing to produce daily liberty media.
Pensacola, Florida, Austin, Texas, Sedona, Arizona, and Denver, Colorado are already on the map. If you have a college group, a local Liberty on the Rocks, or other Liberty meetup that you'd like me to visit, you can possibly add your event to my calendar. To find out more about the tour or to donate, visit tour.fppradio.com. That's tour.fppradio.com.
Welcome back to Peace, Love, Liberty Radio. Online at fppradio.com. So, what were some of the other top news stories of the year? Well, again, based on what people searched for in the category of IPO, which is initial public offering. And that's when a company decides that they don't wish to be privately owned anymore. The owners decide, we want to sell some stocks, try to raise some money, and then have a board of directors and stockholders get to vote and help decide what we do. Well, one of the largest, actually the largest ever IPO, was also the top searched IPO of 2014. I've got the story here from Forbes.com, and this happened back in, I believe, September. Yeah, it was September 22nd is the date on the article here from Forbes. The article reads, after claiming the record for the largest U.S.-listed initial public offering, Alibaba Group can now say its record-breaking IPO was the biggest in the world. The company announced that underwriters had exercised an option to purchase additional shares at the $68 IPO price, boosting the total amount raised by the Chinese e-commerce giant and its selling shareholders from $21.8 billion to $25 billion. Bankers sought an additional 48 million American depository shares, taking the total amount of the shares sold in the offering to 368 million, or about 14.9% of the company. In raising $25 billion, Alibaba's IPO surpassed the 2010 offering from the Agricultural Bank of China, which raised $22.1 billion in its debut on the Hong Kong Stock Exchange. Alibaba was able to sell more shares due to its over-allotment or green shoe option, which allows underwriters to placate investor demand for the stock by obtaining more shares from the company at the IPO price. Existing shareholders, Alibaba Chairman Jack Ma, Vice Chairman Joseph Tsai, and Yahoo provided the extra shares sold in the over-allotment. Ma sold an additional 2.7 million shares, selling a total of about 15.5 million shares in the IPO, while Tsai sold 5.2 million shares after floating an additional 900,000 shares in the green shoe. By selling the over-allotment, Yahoo became the largest seller in Alibaba's IPO, surpassing the 123 million shares offered directly from the Chinese company. Yahoo sold an additional 18.26 million shares, floating a total of 140.3 million shares in the IPO for more than $9.5 billion in pre-tax cash. The article here from Forbes continues. It says Alibaba began trading on the previous Friday, the Friday before the IPO is when they began trading on the New York Stock Exchange, with shares opening at more than 35% above the IPO price. On the Monday after the Friday, shares had fallen below the $90 mark, down more than 4% in intraday trading. And then they mention a couple of banks that were involved as joint book runners for the offering. Now, what I think is very interesting about this is that Alibaba which is if you're not familiar, it's a website where you can go, you buy things at pretty reduced prices. They ship from China. It seems as though in some ways the communist Chinese are out free marketing America, if that makes any sense to you. And I know that I'm using collectivist terms. Just bear with me, because you can't always avoid collectivism. I know it might boggle the mind to think that you can't always avoid collectivism, but there are times when you can't, and there are times when it's just easier to use generalized statements. But let's walk through this a little bit. The statement that I made, that the communist Chinese are out free marketing America. Now, we have been told, or I'm assuming that you were told the same things that I was as a child and even into adulthood, that America is the last bastion of freedom. America is great because of capitalism and free markets. Even though we could spend an entire afternoon debating whether or not capitalism equals free market. It really depends on which definition of the word capitalism you wish to use. If you wish to use the Murray Rothbard redefinition that capitalism is free market, then yes, capitalism is free market. If you wish to use the original definition of the word capitalism, then capitalism is not free market. Capitalism is a regulated market in which the means of production are mostly privately held. Now, regulated and free are not the same thing. So I would argue that, based on the original definition of the word capitalism, yes, America has a capitalist economy or a capitalist economic system where the means of production are mostly privately held. There are, some government-run institutions, some things that the government has purchased. There are, industries that are heavily influenced because of government contracts and other things. So it could be argued whether or not those are actually privately funded companies or the means of production there are privately funded. But again, like I said, we could spend all afternoon discussing just that. But that's not the point that I'm trying to make. The point that I'm trying to make is that, because so much of the American economy now is dependent upon the government, and it seems as though there are, more and more privately run companies out of China that are really becoming multinational corporations doing business across the globe. Alibaba definitely being one, that I would say that, in some ways, and I know there are definitely exceptions to this, but in some ways it seems as though some of the Chinese businesses are out free marketing businesses in the United States. And I think that this is just another example of that. And I know that, you can look at some of the sweatshop labor that happens in China and argue that, they're exploiting their workers. And, in a lot of cases they probably are. But that, again, that's kind of, free market in action, to where, you pay somebody a little less than what they would normally take elsewhere because they can't really find a job elsewhere. And I am not condoning exploiting your workers at all. There's more when we come back.
Hi, I'm Darryl W. Perry, and I need your help to take Peace, Love, Liberty Radio on the road. In the spirit of Motorhome Diaries and Liberty on Tour, I intend to take the message of peace, love, and liberty on the road. I intend to leave New Hampshire at the conclusion of the New Hampshire Liberty Forum and return at the beginning of PorcFest. During the 104-day trip, I'll be visiting at least 10 cities across the country, speaking to people about the ideas of peace, love, and liberty, while continuing to produce daily Liberty media. Pensacola, Florida, Austin, Texas, Sedona, Arizona, and Denver, Colorado are already on the map. If you have a college group, a local Liberty on the Rocks, or other Liberty meetup that you'd like me to visit, you can possibly add your event to my calendar. To find out more about the tour or to donate, visit tour.fppradio.com. That's tour.fppradio.com. The Doublespeak Dictionary by Leslie Starr O'Hara satirizes the marked difference between the ideal of we the people and the reality of we the elite, while offering an insightful glimpse into the clockworks of the totalitarian mind. Ever irreverent but never irrelevant, the Doublespeak Dictionary serves as a subversive and humorous but timely reminder that the emperor has no clothes. The Doublespeak Dictionary is available from Amazon.com and all major bookstores.
Welcome back to Peace, Love, Liberty Radio. Online at fppradio.com. So let's go through some of these other categories on Google Trends for top searches of the year. Under natural events, there was Hurricane Arthur, the Chile earthquake, the Napa earthquake, Hurricane Iselle, and the Oso mudslides. Under movies, the top searched movies for 2014 as of today for the year: Frozen, Interstellar, Divergent, Gone Girl, and Lone Survivor. Not on here, probably because it's been so late in the year, is The Interview. Now, The Interview made a lot of news because there was the hack of Sony because of the movie. Some people, including Barack Obama, blamed North Korea. North Korea said, we didn't do it. Sony initially said that they weren't going to release the film, decided to go ahead and release the movie. And instead of just releasing it in theaters, they also released it on YouTube and Google Play, where you can pay like $6 and watch the movie. And a bunch of people were, going dressed in, like patriotic garb, like, we have to watch the movie because freedom. And I saw a headline yesterday that said that some people are saying it's your patriotic duty to watch The Interview. And some of the reviews that I've seen of the movie have said that the movie is incredibly horrible. Like, it's just an absolutely horrible movie. And I had originally been interested in seeing the movie, The Interview, just because I wanted to see what all the hubbub was about. But after hearing that it's my patriotic duty to watch the movie, I now really don't want to watch the movie. I honestly really don't care, because, I'm not going to watch a movie just because somebody says, like, it's your patriotic duty to watch the movie. Nope, not going to do it. Now, if somebody turns the movie on and I'm sitting in a room where the movie is on a TV, I'm not going to get up and walk away, but I'm not going to go out of my way to watch the movie. Now, other things that are top searches for 2014, under podcast, no, Peace, Love, Liberty Radio did not come in the top 10. Neither did Free Talk Live or Sovereign Tech, a couple of the other podcast and radio programs that I'm really a fan of. Of course, I kind of have to be a fan of Free Talk Live since I'm one of the co-hosts of the show, but Sovereign Tech I'm not in any way affiliated with, other than, I'm a friend of Brian's, and I think he does a great show. And, maybe next year, hopefully, I'll cross my fingers, hopefully next year, Sovereign Tech winds up in that top 10, because it is one of the few podcasts that I think, people need to definitely listen to. Because especially, if you're in any way interested about technology, you need to listen to Sovereign Tech, because Brian, he brings you tech news from the anarchist perspective. And when I say anarchist, I don't mean people throwing Molotov cocktails, because, no, that's not what Brian does. The people that do that, that's, for the most part, probably the COINTELPRO trying to, or agent provocateurs trying to just give anarchist a bad name. Anarchist, and if you've listened to the show before, I know you've heard me define the term. Anarchy is from the Greek that means no rulers. So an anarchist is someone that does not believe in rulers. Now, during Derek J's hearing, Derek J. Freeman, another friend of mine, he does the Peace News Now podcast and radio show. He's also one of the hosts on Freedom Fiends. But during his hearing in Keene District Court he had been denied his concealed carry permit, and during the hearing, the prosecutor asked Derek, "Are you an anarchist?" He initially said, "I plead the fifth." And the judge said, "This is not a criminal proceeding, and that's not a criminal charge. You can't plead the fifth." And so Derek wisely asked the prosecutor, "Can you define the term?" And I'm very glad he did that, because it allowed people to know what the prosecutor thought an anarchist was. The prosecutor said an anarchist is someone who disobeys any authority or who wants to violently overthrow the United States government. And Derek was then able to say, "No, I do not fit your definition. So, no, I am not an anarchist as you've defined it." And that's what a lot of people think anarchist is. And that's really not it. So one person that I think some people might claim is an anarchist, I know other people claim he's a libertarian, and this person has said that the word libertarian is an albatross that people have tried to drape around his neck, Rand Paul. Surprisingly, and I don't know, it might not be surprising to you, but it was definitely surprising to me to see that Rand Paul is the third most Googled politician after Barack Obama and Chris Christie. And then in the top 5, it's Rick Perry and Ted Cruz after Rand Paul. Number 6 is Joe Biden, Elizabeth Warren, Scott Walker, Paul Ryan, and Harry Reid. Now, I don't know if anybody has necessarily ever accused Rand Paul of being an anarchist, but there was, I believe, Nancy Pelosi accused some of the people that are part of that Tea Party caucus in Congress of being anarchist and having actually taken over Congress. Now, okay, so I just did a Google search. It wasn't Nancy Pelosi. It was actually Harry Reid who said that the anarchist had taken over Congress. And, it's just laughable to think that any member of Congress would be someone that doesn't want rulers. They all want government. They just want it their way. Now, something that isn't laughable, on the list of what is ... searches, the fourth top search for what is Bitcoin. And I would say that 2014 has been a pretty big year for Bitcoin. Of course, the price did not, skyrocket the way some people thought that it would. And it's actually down a good bit from where it was at the beginning of the year. But overall, it's been a pretty big year for Bitcoin. There's a lot more businesses that are taking Bitcoin. There's a lot more people that are using Bitcoin. Tonight, there's actually a college football game that is being sponsored by BitPay, and it is the Bitcoin St. Petersburg Bowl. The Georgia Tech University is now taking Bitcoin in their football stadium. All of the stores on campus, I believe, are taking Bitcoin. And I think that 2015 is going to be an even bigger, better year for Bitcoin. Tune in again on Monday. Peace, love, Liberty Radio, online, fppradio.com.